next thing. Cultivation practices. Now, one of the issues they're having is and I've heard this from several people who just don't understand the plant. I've often thought to myself to go to A&M, my alma mater, where I'm good friends with the hemp breeding guy down there, and talk to them about this. Say, hey, well, I'd like for you guys to explain to people specifically why this is not accurate. But the claim is this. The claim is that with home grow, you can grow and produce cannabis with as much THC as possible, or as much as you would want. The potency of cannabis now is higher than it had ever been beforehand. Now, I believe, and I think a lot of other people believe the same thing. It's only higher now because our genetics and our growing ability is much better than it's ever done before. We have grow tents, we have new lights, we have practices that are able to improve the DNA of that actual plant. It's not that we're making the plant get more THC. The DNA of the plant's already set. We're maximizing the DNA, and I think there's a difference.
100%. And actually, it's so funny because the cultivation practices have evolved to the point where they've actually made cannabis more medicinal, because they've been able to now control the environment and eliminate negative aspects. Now, this isn't a problem. Like, this is what the problem is people think it's too potent. So, if you have the ability, so let's say you have beer and you have whiskey. Are you going to drink the same amount of whiskey as you do beer? Or are you going to, if you drink 5 beers and you kind of are like, all right, I'm okay. Maybe that would be equivalent to like 2 shots of whiskey. A person who's going to take 5 beers would, oh, beer's not here, so I'm going to take 5 glasses of whiskey. No, if you were going to take 5 glasses of beer, you would have been taking 2 glasses of whiskey. You stop when the feeling that is there. If you can't stop and you have problems, well, that's a substance abuse disorder that comes from a lot of other things, despite the drug that we need to talk about. But the vast majority of people take a drug until they feel the desired effects and they stop it. So the potency of cannabis just means you don't smoke as much. You don't do as much. You don't see people who were smoking 10 blunts of, Mexican dirt weed with seeds in it with very low THC 20 years ago are the same people today who are smoking a bowl or 2. They're not smoking 20 blunts of high grade medical cannabis, because you can't do it. Like, once you get high, you're high. You can't get higher. I mean, you just get high quicker. What we're misconstruing here, or what the politicians who want to keep it illegal are misconstruing here, is how pharmacology again. The route of administration is important. How a drug gets into your body. Are you shooting it up intravenously? Are you smoking it? Are you consuming it orally? These matter the most. What we need to be telling people is, hey, you need to be aware that if you consume cannabis orally, it's going to have a much different effect on you than if you smoke it. What you've consumed beforehand is going to have an effect. It might take too long. You don't want to eat something orally and then go smoke something because you don't feel something. You don't realize that it's having an effect on you, because cannabis can create heightened states of paranoia if you're not familiar with the drug, right? There's no drug that's not that. I mean, of course there are risks. There's risks to having sex. There's risks to driving a car. There's risks to everything. The government wants to just say, oh, if this has a risk, let's get rid of it for this moral crusade. But instead, we need to be educating people about those risks so they can protect themselves instead of making up this nonsense.
I definitely agree with that. But what historical practices have changed? What have, because you talked to me about, it was not really unethical, but you said it's different. But the cultivation practices, it has been a historical landmark in cannabis growing. And are you referring to the ability to isolate and now get grow tents and really know how to cultivate this?
Well, yeah, no, that's a good point. What I'm referring to in this unethical way is the vast amount of waste, the amount of metals, the amount of pesticides, all of which are in the vast majority of cannabis supply out there. And this has a lot to do, on the one hand, cannabis has become much more medicinal, but on the other hand, there are also chemicals that came with it that are not necessarily the best practices. You like so basically 150 years ago, all cannabis that people consume was consumed outside, right? I'm sorry, it was cultivated outside. The Ganja Mahal in India was like the epicenter. They had high quality cannabis because the way they were cultivating it, and it produced the highest quality. It was good, but what happened is it also, once it came across the Atlantic, it started being cultivated in Mesoamerica, South America, Mexico, and areas as well. And what happens is when the United States government after the 1950s began criminalizing it severely, by the 1970s and 1980s, they're raiding farms outdoors, they're spraying paraquat on it, they're trying to destroy these cultivation centers. And what that did was led people to go indoors. People started developing hydroponics. People started developing chemicals to put in the water to grow the plants in clandestine tents and lights that are very high intensive energy costs, right? Which is ironic because you get these hippies and wanting to be like, free in the land is like, dude, you got the most environmentally taxing industry. Your plant is sucking a lot of energy out. These are the problems that we have. And what happens is when you do something with hydroponics, water doesn't have nutrients. You have to inject nutrients into the water. And so these people who created the industry clandestinely, like, created, chemicals that, like, General Hydroponics cells that are petroleum-based synthetic nutrients that you have to put into the water that leave trace metals in cannabis that are environmentally degrading.
Yeah, that's so true, because I remember hearing and watching people who would have all types of grows inside, not just cannabis, but fruits and vegetables and everything, and they'll have fish tanks underneath, and they grow everything on top of that.
Mm-hmm.
Because the fish we're putting natural enzymes into it. One of the reasons I said that was that in order to do hydroponics organically, it's extremely difficult, and so you have to have replace all this. You have to put it together naturally. So you have to create this environment on top of another environment in order to do that. And they were doing this with not just cannabis, but multiple different types of plants. They were doing
Robert, man, that's so true, and that's one of the most important things that's been said on this conversation right now. Caben Smallwood is the CEO of a company called Symbiotic Aquaponics. They're based out of McAllister in Oklahoma, and they're one of the only companies out there now that are producing cannabis that have absolutely no trace metals, that are completely organic, the true form of organic, meaning there's no none of this stuff, because they're using fish. They're using aquaponics. They're creating nutrients naturally to produce the plant. It's a little bit more cost effective. Cost prohibitive, and you're not going to get as much weight. Just like if you're lifting weights, you're not going to be as strong if you're not pumping steroids into your body, right? But do you really want to have the aftermath of pumping steroids into your body just so you can be big? That's the exact same thing. We're pumping cannabis with all these steroids so they're thicker and heavier. Do you really want that? Or do you want this natural, much far better quality that is going to only be half the weight of a plant that you're doing steroids with, but it's far more ethically farmed and much more healthier for you? That's what I mean about the problem with the cannabis industry. And this is a problem because, when you make something illegal and the vast majority of consumption is going into the black market, what do you expect? People they don't have the resources available to produce these things. And so this is another byproduct of the war on drugs and the criminalization of cannabis, is that you don't give people a safe environment to cultivate it. They're going to cultivate it with bad practices.
And I think that's a good point. From the point where it went illegal to the point that we are now, or we're trying to get it legalized, the problems they say are here with this plant are all due to the fact that they made it illegal.
Oh, yeah.
all the issues they have with this plant are all due to the fact that they made it illegal. Had they never made it illegal, you would not have had the issues of, uh, well, I would say you're less likely to have the issues of the
Yeah, you're much
cultivation
less likely. And any issues that they did have prior to it being illegal had a lot to do with a lack of knowledge about pharmacology and the alternate substances that they were putting into the material, not knowing the difference between route of administration, consuming something orally versus inhaling it, things like this. So I don't want to sit here and say that cannabis doesn't have any risks or side effects. Like
Oh no.
if you're not familiar with cannabis and you consume it in an environment that you're not comfortable with around people you don't know, you can have an adverse reaction. It can
Yes.
happen. It can even happen to well seasoned consumers who are in an environment outside of their comfort zone, right? Like if you try to smoke something, say you're a regular cannabis consumer, but you try to smoke it before you have to give a big presentation to people that you don't know, and you know that they're judging you, you're probably going to be like sweating and panicking and maybe have a reaction if you're not used to that, right? These types of things happen, right?
Yeah, but it's important to know that I tell people all the time, cannabis may not be your answer, and it is not something that is going to fix it all. It
Right.
is a tool that we use to improve our health and to help balance our life. And I
Right.
think that's one of the best ways to approach it. And we've just done a really bad job for the past 100 years of making this either a totally demonized or the Jesus Christ of all medicine.
Right.
And it's neither one,
Right.
right? It is a plant that is so versatile that we all could be using both industrial and medically, that I feel that if we really approach it about having use it in your own personal life as a balance, right? Use it in the industries as a balance, right? The cotton industry shouldn't be threatened by the industrial hemp industry. It should welcome it with open arms, because now you can expand your inventory by blending. So there's a lot of thought that I think people are starting to expand they're thinking outside of the box when it comes to cannabis in this industry. And it is starting to grow. It is really, the last chains that are on their wrists are really with the United States.
Yeah, I mean,
The
that's so
United
true.
States legalizes this completely through Congress, and whichever sitting president at the time signs it, then you will see a big change in a lot of in the UN and several other places. Now, places like Russia and China and in those locations in Istanbul, so that's their fight. But largely for America, we're just on that back part of the hill. It seems like.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's key. Like if you're someone who values liberty and freedom, and you know, and the so-called founding principles of this nation, then you can't not make the argument. Like you have to accept the idea that people should be free to consume what they want until what they're doing maybe is harming others. We can argue, right? Like you don't want to have somebody doing something that's going to harm others. But when you look at cannabis, it doesn't fit that criteria. It doesn't.
They try to make it fit that criteria, but it
Exactly.
really doesn't, because what we're looking for is a strain on your society, your local society, right? Your community. Is this a strain on your community if you allow to have it? Well, fentanyl. Well, if you just allow fentanyl to be picked up at the store whenever you want to, would you have a strain in your society? Well, we do now. It's a problem now. But they say, well, we have a same problem with cannabis. We have a lot of people coming in who took too much cannabis, and they go to the emergency rooms, and the emergency room gets filled up. And I tell them, I said, that's not what you should be asking. You should be asking what happened to them after they left. What did the doctors tell them? They're going to be fine.
Right.
You panicked.
Right.
Right. And
Yeah.
how much of that actually happens versus the amount of fentanyl that comes in here? Or how about this? You tell me how many of the prescribed overdoses that come through that emergency room, because that's 100% legal, and you guys wrote $1 trillion bills backing all that up.
Man,
So
I
if
mean,
it's
it's so
way
true.
below that, then I think this isn't an argument.
Even both of these things, fentanyl and cannabis, the problems that any problems that we see with emergency room visits would drastically decrease if both of these substances were made, we were knowledge of them, we were aware of them. The vast majority of people who are having a problem with fentanyl is because they're trying to get heroin and they don't know that they're getting fentanyl. So if somebody knows that they're getting fentanyl, they're not going to take as much as they would if it was heroin. Same thing with cannabis. People are going to the emergency room because they don't have access to knowledge about cannabis. They're taking in the black market, doing these other things behind closed doors, aware, worried. Maybe they feel like they're doing something criminal. They have this bad reaction. But if you have the ability to know what these things are, then you will be able to mitigate the problems associated with them. Like it's like you create the problem and then feed the problem, and so that you can go, look at this problem, and so that we can spend the money to attack the problem when your policies towards the thing is what's causing the problems in the first place.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And it's funny because Republicans usually in Texas can see this economically oftentimes.
So in Texas, it's all politics in Texas.
Right.
The vast majority of the people in Texas, and I can tell you, I'm a sixth generation Texan, and you know, all of our red dirt country songs and our folklore and everything else, there's cannabis mixed in all throughout that. It's really the GOP, the state GOP. They're against it. The head guys that are in charge of it are old school Republicans, and they don't like it all because the left supports it so much.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't like either one of them.
Yeah.
I'm not a partisan. I'm very, very bipartisan. I hate both of them equally with all of my soul. You know, because they put us here. Like, they've created a lot of veterans.
Right. I mean, that's the problem. You know, to me, politics is the art of compromise, and you know, they don't really look for the general understanding, right? And this is a great example of, like, you know, this is these Republicans who have this true to free market arguments. If they can just extend their arguments to cannabis, it would work. And these Democrats who think that it's like, you know, Jesus Christ of medicine. If you can understand that we need to be aware of problems associated, then, you know, we can both see how beneficial this can be. And I think it has something to do, like you hit the nail on the head, I think, with Texas. I mean, it kind of reminds me of like the gambling thing with all these Republican states surrounding Texas, but Texas is sort of like, not us. We're different. You know, we kind of we're not following in line. And sometimes what we call a contrarian. You ever met somebody who's a contrarian? They just always disagree with you, like whatever you say. Sometimes that can get you into trouble. And it seems like with these issues, Texas likes to be the contrarian because it's big and it's surrounded by these other ones, and they're like, well, we're different. But that's fine. But you also got to not let your difference and your desire to be different blind you from very real issues that you can fix and benefit the people in your state by doing so.
I agree. And that's how we're going to wrap this up.
Right on.
Hey, man, I really do appreciate you coming on and giving us this wealth of knowledge. It's good. And we'll be talking to you
anytime.
soon.